Emirates flight EK729 touched down at Entebbe Airport at 2:30 p.m. on Friday with cargo that perhaps none of the passengers was aware of. A nondescript box containing the body of Justin Kamabati, who died 4 months ago in the Saudi Arabian southwestern provincial city of Aba. As calls received their loved ones, Kamabati's family were greeted with sorrow and anguish. The 46-year-old left for work in Saudi Arabia in September 2021 through a locally licensed company, Perilous Job Mart, which recruits for a Saudi-based agency, Tamkin Human Resources. 10 months into her job, she was dead. Police in Saudi Arabia indicates that the cause of her death was suicide. But in the murky world of labor export to the Middle East, which often results in the most egregious abuses in modern slavery, it may be safe to conclude that the cause of Kamabati's death remains unclear. Earlier on, efforts to return her body hit a snag amid tightrope pulling between her family and the recruitment agency. The poorly funded Uganda embassies abroad hardly have room for such miscellaneous expenditures. Oftentimes, diplomats clash with bureaucracies of foreign governments to allow the repatriation of bodies. The answer or answers to what triggered her to commit suicide is one her family will never get. However, Kamabati would be the 5th Ugandan girl to die by suicide and other causes from Saudi Arabia this year alone.
How can we lose more than 5 girls in a space of 1 month?
In August, a group of former migrant workers under their umbrella, Torture Survivors Movement Uganda, dropped a coffin outside the Saudi embassy in Kololo in protest of the continued torture and killings of Ugandan migrant workers in the Middle East. Suicide is a serious public health problem across the globe, according to the World Health Organization, which tends to happen impulsively in moments of crisis, with a breakdown in the ability to deal with life stresses. In the case of migrant workers in Gulf countries, several studies have documented the punishing working conditions that workers from sub-Saharan Africa and other developing countries in Asia face. The situation is impaired by the kafala or sponsorship system that gives private citizens and companies in the Gulf states nearly total control over migrant workers' employment. There is also sexual exploitation, gender-based violence, overworking, inadequate health care, and overcrowded living conditions. It is a living hell for many, though a few are lucky to get good jobs where their bosses are respectful.
You know, there's a mistaken belief that there are dollars on trees the moment you leave this country. You know, people are not sensitized enough to think that the world economy is in turmoil. It's not only in Uganda, it's everywhere. Inflation is everywhere. You know, salaries are depressed everywhere. Human rights can be violated here as well as abroad. But, you know, so that mindset of thinking, I am overeducated, I'm not going into agriculture, I am not going to, you know, I can't start a business here, I must be given a job, and that the best job exists abroad. I think that's also a fallacy. So we need to inculcate in our young minds that indeed home is still best. You know, there are opportunities that exist here. We just need to do a bit more groping to be able to have those jobs in Uganda, and that job that you think will change your life abroad might actually ruin your life.
Because we need to have different government institutions work together to discuss how effectively they can contain or stop trafficking, human trafficking. And number 2, also to advise those that traffic themselves about the dangers, the risks they take when you stay there illegally.
President Museveni in April described as, quote, wrong and temporary the skyward trends of droves of young people leaving the country to work as domestic workers in the Gulf states of Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. While speaking at the 5th Joan Kagezi Memorial Lecture in Kampala, the president said he and his NRM government never envisioned such a crisis, described in government policy documents as externalization of labor when they shot to power.
We should not be here externalizing our children to go and work for others. There are some countries in the world that externalize their children, like the Philippines. You go all over the place, you find Filipinos all over the place. However, you have got other countries, like South Korea. The only South Korean I have ever seen abroad is Ban Ki-moon, the one who was Secretary General of the UN. You don't see South Koreans all over the place. This is the vision of the NRM. NRM, we don't want our children to go to work as a bapakasi for other people.
He blamed the trend on Ugandans and their leaders for not listening carefully to the NRM's economic advice. Previously, the president, in power for 36 years, has been baffled how resource-rich Africa was leapfrogged by South Korea and Singapore to becoming highly developed mixed economies today. This he often blames on ideological disorientation and colonialism, yet he has served as president for a period longer than the combined reigns of all the other leaders, including Milton Obote and Idi Amin. Whereas Uganda is yet to scale the modest lower middle income of $1,036, Singapore's per capita GDP is at $61,000. A 2019 Uganda Bureau of Statistics annual labor force survey put overall unemployment rate at about 12%, or 1.4 million persons aged 14 to 64 years, of which female unemployment rate is 2 times that of the males. During the same period, youth unemployment had dropped by 1 percentage point to 17%, but has since shot to 21% following 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, which crippled the economy. Knee-jerk interventions such as youth livelihood funds have become vessels of corruption and have failed to deliver job creation amongst youth. Many angry and disillusioned youths continue to leave in droves for the Middle East to look for jobs through licensed firms and traffickers. The president's comments came at the heels of distress calls from hundreds of Ugandans stranded in the United Arab Emirates, particularly in Dubai, who are accusing government for not negotiating proper safeguards for migrant Ugandan workers. Some of the voices of those trapped in slavery that filtered across social media offered personal anecdotes about torture, illegal detention, poor living conditions, and other forms of mistreatment. Ugandan diplomats initially downplayed the crisis, according to highly placed diplomatic sources, owing to the United Arab Emirates' sensitivity to criticism over claims of mistreatment of migrant workers. In 2018, the Emirati kicked out Uganda's then ambassador, Ms. Nimisha Madvani, after she invited a group of MPs to witness firsthand the plight of Ugandan women in United Arab Emirates. When the National Unity Platform President Robert Kyagulanyi commenced a fundraising to repatriate some of the stranded girls in Dubai, the matter bordered on a diplomatic row. Uganda's ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, Wanome Chibedi, however, told NTV that the majority of Ugandans were to blame.
We repatriated from UAE over 3,000 Ugandans. Then for this time around, why you see that it has come so much in the news, it is because there were a number of so many nationalities that were stranded on the streets of Dubai. Not only Ugandans, but over 8 different nationalities. The numbers surged because of Dubai Expo 2020. There are many that came in anticipation of getting jobs. Some got jobs, some didn't get jobs. But even those that got jobs, the contracts expired after 6 months because the expo ran for 6 months. So these people that were stranded on the streets, they were homeless. They did not have food, they did not have health care.
Dubai, one of the 7 regions of the United Arab Emirates and whose economy alone is the second largest in the Middle East, as an economic powerhouse, Dubai became a magnet for cheap labor, especially from Africa. When the city was chosen in 2013 to host Expo 2020, initially planned from October 2020 to April 2021, but was rescheduled from October 1st, 2021 to March 31st, 2022, after COVID-19 struck, many Ugandans traveled to the city in search for job opportunities around the trade carnival.
The genesis is that there are quite a number of Ugandans that are trafficked to that country, and some even traffic themselves. Like you can come and visit on a visit visa, but then end up looking for jobs. And in case you get a job, some forget to change the visa status from visit to employment visa. And eventually in the system, you'll be recorded to be in overstay. But even those that fail to get the jobs during the validity period of the visa, they don't plan to exit the country before it expires. The advice we've always given to the Ugandans to avoid getting into such trouble is that you'll exit the country before the visa expires so that you are not blacklisted.
The COVID-19 pandemic upended many plans and living conditions of many African migrant workers. Consequently, African envoys in the United Arab Emirates succeeded in negotiating amnesty for all aliens to depart the country at no cost, running from August to October. Of the 3,000 illegal migrants who registered, 1,500 were Ugandans, but only 280 had passports, which posed more complications.
Because the majority of these stranded nationalities were Africans, the African ambassadors in the United Arab Emirates engaged with the authorities in the UAE to see how they can be helped or supported. And fortunately, the government of UAE, Dubai in particular, responded positively by offering a place where all these people convened before being repatriated. And they even offered amnesty, because if you are in overstay, the first day of your overstay, you are fined an equivalent of 300,000 Ugandan shillings. And every subsequent day, you pay 100,000 shillings daily. So if someone has overstayed for 31 days, it will come like to 3.3 million shillings. But this was forgiven under the amnesty. This amnesty was granted to run from October this year, I mean from August until October this year. And those that turned up for the amnesty, to benefit from the amnesty, were 3,000 people. And out of these 3,000 people, 50% were Ugandans, 1,500 to be specific.
According to Uganda's embassy in Abu Dhabi, of the 100,000 Ugandans estimated to be living in the United Arab Emirates, 5% are there illegally, even with the recent repatriations. Migration for a better life and opportunities is as old as history of mankind, but modern voyages for employment and its linkages with development has in the recent past emerged as a global issue which affects most countries around the world. According to the International Labour Organization, countries of origin for the labor greatly benefit from remittances and the skills acquired during their migration experience, while the host countries want the labor because it is cheap. Yet, the migration process also poses several challenges. Many migrant workers, especially low-skilled workers, experience serious abuse and exploitation. Women, increasingly migrating on their own and now accounting for almost half of all international migrants, face specific protection problems. The Commissioner for Employment Services in the Ministry of Gender, Lawrence Egulu, told NTV the tendency of Ugandans to overstay tourist visas complicates matters.
The underside of it is, of course, what we sometimes see in the social media. Some are good stories, some unfortunately are bad stories, and as you know, bad news travels faster, so the bad news tends to be circulated also faster. And so those are the, the sticking points. So when there is one death, it is one too many, and those are the kind of areas that we need to work on to ensure that the welfare, the safety of our migrant workers abroad is adequately taken care of.
He said the matter of mistreatment varies from employer and specific countries.
Situations where we do not have formal arrangements, you go get a job and things are rosy, well and good. Now, you go for the Dubai Expo, for instance, or right now we're going for the World Cup in Qatar. The visas are limited for a certain period of time. Or you go as a tourist, you're tired of being in Kampala, you want to go and check out Burj Khalifa or wherever you want to do in Dubai or in anywhere in the world, and then you overstay your visa. You are essentially an illegal alien. You might get a job, but the job is informal because your employer, your employment is tied to your kind of visa. So if you don't have a visa, it means you don't have a residence permit. It means you cannot have a work permit. Then COVID comes. Then you lose the job. Then your passport has expired. Remember, you've overstayed your visa. Now, every day that you're in that foreign country, you are liable. You're liable for fines. So before you know it, the fines are huge and you can't afford it. You want to try to get an Emirates ticket or a Fly Dubai ticket back to Entebbe. Maybe you've lost a job. So now that category of people becomes they become a distress case.
The Department of Employment Services, which oversees labor externalization, estimates that Ugandans working in the Gulf states could be close to 200,000, while the Association of External Recruitment Agencies put the number to at least 165,000 by 2020. The government first mulled externalization of labor in 2005, at the time with many Ugandans seeking for opportunities in Europe and North America. But with their restrictive visa regimes, Middle East soon became the major destination. Today, government policy documents detail labor externalization as one of the antidotes for the growing youth unemployment amidst the economic turbulence occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of Uganda's labor exports abroad consists of low skills.
It's a mindset thing. And these guys, some of them, you fly abroad and you've seen them, you're at the airport, you're reporting, you see them. The excitement is just because they're leaving the country, I have had my first passport, I have what is called a visa, I'm going to get into that airport, I'm going to get into that aircraft, I'm traveling. Karindi, Dubai, then you take selfies and you're so excited. But have you also seen that on the way back, if you were to fly from Dubai to here, there is a certain level of sadness. They're not sad because they're leaving jobs, but they're sad because certain things didn't go right. And those are the things we tell them. I'm very open with them, I tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the business. You're going into this, but there could be the following. And of course, there are also issues where our own people, because of lack of preparedness, you get into Saudi Arabia, it is 50 degrees centigrade. You are used to our Butambala weather of 25 degrees, very mild. You are used to our food, you are used to, your laissez-faire culture, and then you get there and it's a different regime altogether.
Last year, remittances from externalization of labor to the Middle East climbed to $1.2 billion, about 4.4 trillion Uganda shillings, up from $600 million, about 2.2 trillion Uganda shillings in 2019. However, as the labor export industry grows and has become lucrative, including regime cronies, government continues to delay the process of regulation and ensuring proper safeguards to protect Ugandans traveling abroad. Last year in November, Cabinet agreed on a raft of changes, including increasing budgets of the two entities, establishing distress centers in United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, where distraught Ugandans can seek shelter. Cabinet also recommended the posting of labor attaches at the two missions, but much of this remains on paper. Officialization of externalization of labor requires signing of bilateral migration agreements with the destination countries. But currently, Uganda has only 3 agreements with Saudi Arabia, which expires next month, Jordan, which was suspended in mid-2019 following a litany of complaints of Ugandans being mistreated while authorities did little to respond, and United Arab Emirates, which was signed in June 2019 but is non-operational. Despite having formal arrangements with only 3 countries, Uganda exports labor to several Middle East nations including Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, Oman, Kuwait, Iraq, Turkey, Afghanistan and Lebanon. Officials in Kampala and Ugandan diplomats in the Middle East, speaking off the record, admit that this work exposes young people to danger.
For us, we say lack of a bilateral labor agreement should not stop us from maintaining our relationships with these countries. We don't have a bilateral agreement with the United States, but if you went to Boston, there are Ugandans all over the place, you know, the East Coast, the West Coast, they're everywhere. The UK, we don't have any either, but Ugandans are there. So, at the end of the day, bilateral labor agreement is not a panacea for the maintenance of workers' rights, because it's just like any formal agreement. You will sign an agreement and people will still violate those agreements. You will not have an agreement and there will be good jobs, good opportunities, and our people will be treated with dignity. So we base our agreement on that. In the event, you know, we have embassies in those countries, so they can also be able to watch out for us. We have, as I said, long-term bilateral agreements. There are students there, there are workers there, there are investments, the investors moving back and forth, traders. So that also informs our decision. But for all those countries, we've submitted draft agreements. And, you know, diplomacy takes a while. We are not asleep. We still would like to see something formalized.
As Kamabati's grieving family prepares to honor her in a dignified burial, she will not be the last victim of this modern-day slavery, where the rules favor the master because meek African countries fear to dent their relationships with the oil-rich Gulf nations. Add to the mix many African countries' failure to put in place mechanisms to monitor the implementation of labor export bilateral arrangements and pre-externalization checks on the working conditions, safety, and health perspectives of the labor importing agencies in the host countries, which means no safety is guaranteed.